As good as Sawyer Robertson was in 2024, he had one thing holding him back. Here's to hoping he doesn't have that in 2025.
You are Locked On Baylor, your daily podcast on the Baylor Bears. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello there, Bears fans. Welcome to another episode of Locked On Baylor, brought to you by Game Time. I'm your host, Cam Stewart of ESPN Central Texas and The Cam Show on Rogue Media Sports Network. Appreciate you guys making it your first listen today and every day, because we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it is your team every day. In today's show, let's talk about what was holding back Sawyer Robertson last year, because if he was being held back, this dude is really going to break out in 2025. Plus, Scott Drew, he did get a name, basically, signing on the dotted line. He gets his first big commitment in the transfer portal. Let's tell you all about him. And also, Houston is in the Final Four. That should be good for the Big 12, right? We'll actually tell you why the Cougars are bringing down the conference in some respects. All that and more coming up on this episode of Locked On Baylor. We start with spring football again. Sawyer Robertson was the guy in 2024. There were all kinds of guys that broke out for Baylor, right? With Bryson Washington as well, Josh Cameron, a couple of guys on the defensive side like Keaton Thomas. But Sawyer Robertson stole the headlines, both in print and in the podcasting world as well. Trust me, I know. Sawyer Robertson was the guy, the big takeaway from the 2024 Baylor football season, because it was like, finally, they've got the quarterback thing figured out. That's the most important position on the field. And as great as Sawyer was, you know, the 26 touchdown passes, even though he didn't play the whole season, the highest quarterback rating of any returning quarterback in the nation. As great as all those things were, would you believe me if I told you he was being held back last year? Not by the offense, not by Dave Aranda, not by the weapons, not by the offensive line. But remember, after that great TCU win, Sawyer left the stadium in a boot. And for like 5 seconds, all our worlds were crumbling down. We're like, oh God, finally, we got this streak going. They were still one win away from going bowling. And we're like, here we go. This is just Baylor's luck. But he played the rest of the season, and he was still pretty good. And I don't think we noticed it at the time, but as we look back, he could have been even better. Baylor could have been even better. Now, they only lost one game after that, and it was the bowl game against LSU. But that's something that has weighed on Sawyer here in this offseason, because he knows he did not put out his best season in 2024, or at least it could have been better, because this injury that we didn't really notice at the time, because he was still throwing the ball pretty well, was nagging him the whole back half of the season.
How much did it affect you think, toward the end of the season?
I mean, quite a bit. Just like wasn't able. I'm glad it wasn't talked about a lot. It means I was throwing the ball where it needed to go. But yeah, no, it did. Like I wasn't able to scramble as well, and like when the play would like break down, I think that's where like you saw it the most. And then some of those longer runs that I had, just wasn't able to do that, and so it affected me quite a bit. But I was able to grow like other parts of my game as far as like having to throw it and putting it in the perfect spot for a receiver to catch it, whereas other times like I would just tuck it and run. So
it really was holding him back towards the end of that season. And again, they only lost one game after that. But thinking back to that Texas Bowl, that LSU game, when Bryson Washington goes out with an injury in the first quarter, and the way that how porous the LSU defense was in that game, I think having, you know, beginning of the season athlete Sawyer Robertson, the healthy Sawyer Robertson, could have really helped them win that game, right? He was obviously great through the air. He threw for well over 400 yards, and they needed to pass the whole time. But think of how many times the play broke down in that game. And with LSU being so soft defensively, that could have really, really helped the Bears. And it's something that I didn't notice until Sawyer was talking about it here. Like, we knew he had the injury, but you look at the numbers the last couple of games of the season, it really did hold him back. You know, it's really looking at 4 games after TCU, and one of them was Houston, which was his worst game of the year. You guys remember, I mean, he threw 2 touchdowns, but threw 3 picks. And Baylor, you know, kind of survived and hung on in that game, and they won it 20-10. But you look at the rushing numbers. right? This guy was kind of stunning everybody with how he could run the ball in some of these games. He was, I think, the first quarterback in Baylor history since RG3 to have two 40-plus yard touchdown runs on the season. He had one, a 50-yard run against Colorado. He had a 41-yard run against Oklahoma State in that game. Remember had his arms out, "Are you not entertained?" touchdown run where nobody laid a finger on him for 41 yards. Like, this guy was a pretty effective runner as kind of a last resort. After that, West Virginia, Houston, Kansas, LSU could not get out of the pocket, man. I mean, the only game he had positive yards was in that LSU game. Everything else was negative. 2 for -5, 3 for -14, 6 for -11, and then 4 for 3. Now, most of that comes, via sacks. He was sacked 3 times against KU, but that's what he's talking about, man. He couldn't extend the play. He was losing plays out there. And for a guy who threw for 3,000 yards, 28 touchdowns, and 8 picks, like that, it could have been even better for him. And Jake Spavital thinks it's going to be even better for him because, we've talked about the great quarterbacks, the great college quarterbacks that Spav has worked with, right? Guys like Brandon Whedon and Case Keenum, as a Heisman finalist, and Will Grier, kind of slept on how good his last 2 years were at West Virginia, or Geno Smith, how great he was in 2012. Baylor saw that up close and personal. Well, Spav talking about those guys has Sawyer Robertson very much in that company now that he's kind of free and healthy going into 2025.
The intelligence side of it all. Like when Case Keenum was at where I really learned quarterback play at Houston, you could literally just call a formation and Case could get you in the right play. And I challenged, Geno with that, and Will Grier, and, even Brandon Whedon, and a lot of guys over the years. And that's what I'm doing with Sawyer. I'm letting him check. I'm letting him call. And that's what I see the similarities with him, is that he's starting to understand, hey, we got a light box. I can check a run. I can maybe get it to a pass on these, or I got soft leverage. Let me take an easy take. He's just so far more advanced and comfortable in the system. So as a coach, I got to find ways to challenge him more. That's why I'm trying to get these vertical throws down the field to into the field side instead of the boundary a little bit more, and just keep challenging him on the right checks and understanding down and distance and make sure he's doing the right thing. But I don't like to compare quarterbacks, that I've had in the past, because I think Sawyer is, just turning into his own man, and he's making a name for himself in the style of play that he has. So it's fun to watch him develop right now.
Big 12 defenses everywhere are shaking in their boots already, because we knew Sawyer was going to be good going into 2025. What we didn't know is that there's so much more, that he was held back at the end of last year, and there's so much more to his game, and that he's learning still. He's going to be big time this year. This obviously has not been the first time I've talked about Sawyer Robertson in this offseason. It will be far from the last time that we talk about Sawyer Robertson. Probably not the last time we talk about Sawyer Robertson this week. But hearing that from Jake Spavital, with the great college quarterbacks he's worked with, saying, the intelligence part, the between the ears part, Sawyer's right there. And we're still challenging him, but he's right there. And that you can throw any situation at him. And honestly, you look back at the 24 season, you threw just about every situation at him. You saw obviously a ton of different kinds of defenses, played in a ton of different kinds of games, ones where he did not have to throw for them to win, ones where he had to throw every down for them to try and win, heartbreaking losses, exciting wins, last minute drives. He got to see all of it, and his intelligence is only getting better. That's frightening for the rest of the Big 12. Won't be for us, though. We'll have plenty of fun with it. I'm hoping we have some more fun with men's basketball season next year, as opposed to what we had this year. And Scott Drew is on the road, and he has that first building block for the team that we are going to see represent the Baylor Bears next year. Let's talk about that piece next on Locked On Baylor. But first, you guys know I've got a question for you. You ever look at that bank account and wonder just where did all my money go? Between dining out, online shopping, and entertainment, it's easy to lose track. My girlfriend was away for the weekend. Trust me, those things pile up when you're getting food delivered to you. That's where Monarch Money comes in. It's your personal CFO. It gives you full visibility and control over your finances. It ain't just like any other budgeting app. It's a complete financial command center where you're tracking all your accounts, investments, and spending in one place. So you're not just managing your money anymore. You are building wealth. And if you manage money with a partner, it's smoother than ever with Monarch Money. You can track shared and personal accounts, set goals, and stay on the same page without the stress. So take the control out of your finances with Monarch Money. Use code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. That's monarchmoney.com, code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for half off your first year. Today's episode is also brought to you by our good friends over at Game Time. It's the only ticketing app that I go to use. I can't recommend it enough. Imagine watching your favorite team live, feeling the energy of the crowd. I always say, if you get a chance to go to the game, go to the game. In fact, I'm crossing off something off my bucket list this week. I am going to opening day at Wrigley Field. You know where I got the tickets? Game Time. Game Time, man. And the getting ticket part shouldn't be stressful. The game should be. That's where Game Time comes in, making it easier than ever to grab last-minute seats at unbeatable prices. Game Time picks make sure that curation makes it easier to find better value for tickets to sports, concerts, comedy, theater, anything that needs a ticket. You can get it on Game Time with the lowest price guarantee, or Game Time is going to credit you 110% of the difference. And you can even see the views from your seats before you hit purchase, which is important at Wrigley Field and some of those kind of places. So download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off your first purchase and take the guesswork out of buying tickets. That's Locked On, COLLEGE, for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices, and that, of course, is guaranteed. Scott Drew has his work cut out for him. We all know that going into this offseason. It's not the first time we've talked about it. It won't be nearly the last time we talk about exactly what Scott Drew has to do. Another player going into the portal today, Giannis, last name. It didn't really play for Baylor, but he's in the portal as well, which just reemphasizes how much Scott Drew is going to have to load up into the transfer portal shopping cart. Good news is, he got his first commitment from the portal on Monday. Michael Rattay, I believe is how you say that. I've heard announcers say it both ways. Rataj from Oregon State. He comes in with just 1 year of eligibility left, it looks like. He comes in after his junior year. A wing guy, forward, 6'9", 220. First team all West Coast Conference last year because, Oregon State plays in the West Coast Conference now. 17 points a game, led the team with 7 rebounds as well, and shooting it almost 50% from the floor. So far, so good, man. Like, there's not many holes you can poke in that. You're adding a 17-point scorer who can score a little outside, a lot more inside, and can help your team at both ends of the floor. 35% three-point shooter last year, which was 6 points higher than percentage points than the year before, and took more threes this past year. So that's a good jump. He only takes like 3 or 4 a game, so it's nothing crazy. He does most of his scoring at the rim. Actually, more than half his points are at the rim. But his team was much better when he was out on the floor. They had 110 offensive rating. He did, not them. He did. So when he's on the floor, for every 100 possessions, Oregon State was going to score 110 points. And those of you who follow like the team stats like that, that's a pretty anything over 100 there is pretty significant. And he comes in for a team that was, not great. But he made them better. He made Wayne Tinkle's team better. And yes, his name is Wayne Tinkle. You've got to feel for the guy. You've got to feel for the guy. At least that's a little bit easier to pronounce. But Michael Rattay comes in here as a guy who can score a little bit inside and out. He can be a wing guy for you, which you really didn't have this past year, that kind of two-way wing. Jalen Celestine was not that. And we'll see if he uses that extra year to return to Baylor and be a big part of this thing. But I would say the Celestine year was disappointing with his 3-point shooting, and just, he was kind of called on to play more of an inside game, especially defensively, than I think he was expecting going into this year. And VJ, while could play physical, and so could Langston Love. Like, those guys were guards. They weren't wing guys, even though VJ had a pretty good wingspan. Michael Ratai is that. He absolutely is that, coming in, and was, genuinely one of the best players on the West Coast this past year. So that's kind of the first shoe to drop for Scott Drew. And that's a big one, because again, replacing this whole roster, I'm interested to see how quickly this moves, because as we talked about on the show yesterday, with Obi Agbim of Wyoming, that's apparently coming down at any second. Like, he's going to be owed a good amount of money. And unlike years past, the last 2 or 3 years, Baylor does not need to go and get 2 or 3 guys out of the portal. They need to get like 10 guys out of the portal. So there is kind of a money management thing here. And that sucks that that's what we talk about in college sports these days, but that's the way it is, man. So you can't just commit, $600,000 or something like that to Obi Agbim on day one of free agency when you have a limited budget. And we are starting to see guys who are kind of rushing their transfer portal process because the revenue sharing is going to kick in, and that salary cap is going to kick in a few weeks here. And so they're trying to get, those guys who are trying to get north of $1 million are doing it now. And that goes for the few guys who are on Baylor's roster still. I don't think Rob Wright's getting $1 million somewhere, but could get a pay raise. And that goes for the guys who Baylor is looking at. And so Obi Agbim might fit into that, but apparently there's a good enough deal in place for Michael Ratai, who again gives them some inside scoring, a guy who can defend a couple different positions, it looks like, from his size. Also can put the ball on the floor too, by the way. 14% assist rate for a 6'9" wing. That's not that bad. That's pretty solid, and can create his own shot a little bit. So that's a good start to the transfer portal for Scott Drew. Absolutely. And by the way, just a real quick note, because it does seem like a minor thing, but looking at guys who are going to play for Baylor next year, they only have one commitment through high school recruiting. And he's having a pretty good week. McDonald's All-American practice this week. They put out the top performers after day one. On 3 did. Cam Boozer, Duke commit, number 1, Carlos Boozer's son. Number 3, Tunde Yesufu of Baylor Bears fame. AJ DeBonsa, the number 1 prospect in the class, slotting right behind him at number 4. A lot of Big 12 guys, by the way. Yesufu, DeBonsa, Krasinak from UH, another guy that Baylor was hot on the trail of. Darren Peterson from Kansas, and Isaiah Harwell also of UH. So a lot of Big 12 on there, but this is just the beginning of it's 2 signs of positive news for Baylor for next year's team, that you got Tunde Yesufu looking good against the best in high school basketball, and Michael Ratai coming in as a first-team All-West Coast Conference selection being added to this roster for the 25-26 season. So let me know what you guys think about this pickup and what Baylor needs to do going forward. Please let me know in the comments below, or tweet at us. If you're not watching on YouTube, you can tweet at us at Locked On Baylor. But if you are on YouTube, be sure to like and subscribe. That helps out the channel a lot. About half of you that are watching every day are still not subscribed. That helps us out a ton. We want to be your number 1 source, your number 1 Baylor sports podcast. I think we've done a pretty good job of that, if I might say so myself. Locked On Baylor rolls on. We have to look at a little bit of Big 12 as a whole in college basketball. And those Houston Cougars looked like it was going to be a great rivalry with them on the hardwood. Houston in the Final Four, but are they actually bringing down the Big 12 in the process? Let's talk about it next on Locked On Baylor. But first, a word from Supply House, one of our newest sponsors here on the Locked On Network. Get the supplies you need from the site made for the skilled trades, Supply House. Whether you're in plumbing, HVAC, or electrical work, Supply House is the reliable way to order products online. Their easy-to-use website is packed with helpful resources and the latest product info to help you get the job done right. Plus, with a complete inventory of over 200,000 parts from 400 plus top brands, you're going to find exactly what you need, delivered fast from coast to coast. Need help with an order? Supply House offers expert support and industry-leading service, so you'll always talk to a real person. And for trade pros looking for that extra edge, their free Trademaster program offers exclusive perks like a dedicated phone line, free shipping, and discounts on every order. Thousands of skilled professionals are already taking advantage. Now it's your turn. Join the Trademaster program today at supplyhouse.com/TM and start ordering plumbing, HVAC, and electrical supplies with just a few clicks. Plus, you use the promo code SH5 for 5% off your first order. That's supplyhouse.com. And then the other word is from the bracket breakdown.
The NCAA tournament is here, and so is the bracket breakdown.
Locked On Podcast Network and Amazon Fire TV channels are teaming up to deliver NCAA tournament coverage like never before. Watch studio shows featuring former players and Locked On's local experts as they guide you through every upset, buzzer beater, and bracket matchup.
Stream it all for free on Amazon Fire TV channel. Search Bracket Breakdown to see it all for free.
It's your team every day.
Speaking of that bracket, we're down to 4 teams. Final Four weekend is almost upon us here. And the Big 12 does have a representative, of course, the Houston Cougars. Congratulations to them. LJ Cryer will play in another Final Four. Well, will play in a Final Four. And the Cougs absolutely deserve to be there, man. This is not obviously a Houston podcast, but looking at this conference as a whole, like we saw it, and Baylor played them tough the second time, but the way this Houston program is humming is pretty incredible. And on paper, this should be a great thing for the Big 12. And I'm here to tell you that it is, okay? This is not going to be, what I'm about to say is not going to be bashing Houston. But to some people, this won't be that great for the Big 12. And I'm going to tell you why. Because those of us who have watched this conference, I've said this thousands of times on this show, those of us who have watched Big 12 basketball for a while now, we know that the Big 12 has been an elite level, if not the best conference in college basketball for the last decade or so, right? Like those of us watching will be able to tell you that the style of play, how tight it was at the top, the home court advantages, like that's been there for 10 years now. But the national media didn't start hyping up the Big 12. The greater college basketball media didn't start hyping up the Big 12 till what, 5 or 6 years ago, right? And at that time that they started to hype it up, we started seeing, Tech in the national championship game. We saw Baylor win the whole damn thing in 2021. Those things is what kind of opened up the nation's eyes to the Big 12. So what changed from 10 years ago to 5 years ago, 6 years ago? What changed in that span? Someone else won the Big 12. Every year before, the Big 12 was still pretty damn good, but nobody was Kansas, right? And then in 19, I think Tech and Kansas State shared the title, and Tech goes to the Final Four. And the next year, Baylor wins the title, and they win the national championship. And the next year, Baylor and Kansas split it, and then Kansas wins the national championship. And the next year, you've got 3 teams in the top 5 or 6. So at that point, it's like we've already hit it because there's really great parity and really great teams mixed in that parity. And then this year, no one was talking about the Big 12 nationally. Everybody was talking about the SEC. And the SEC gets 14 teams into the NCAA tournament. And they get 2 in the Final Four. Maybe it is a great conference, right? No one's saying it wasn't. But maybe we needed to pump the brakes on, kind of dissing the Big 12. Because with all this SEC hype this year, nobody was talking about how the Big 12 was still business as normal. It was really good. You know why they weren't talking about that? Because Houston ran roughshod over it for the second year in a row. That's the thing the national media doesn't like. Outside of SEC football, in the days of Alabama, they never hype up a conference when there's one team dominating it. In the mid-aughts, like the Big 12 was pretty nuts, but Texas was the team. And so there was no reason to talk about that. Right. And again, what I just laid out the last 5 or 6 years, there wasn't much to talk about. It was so good because there wasn't that team at the top that was going to crush everybody with their weight. Now there is. As good as the Big 12 was this year, Houston has lost 2 Big 12 games in 2 seasons. They're making this conference look easy. So yeah, Houston being in the Final Four is good for the Big 12 for us, but for the national media, it doesn't help. Trust me, it doesn't, because Houston is alone at the top. Even though there's they're really good teams, scattered all over this conference, and you almost had the 3rd place team playing in the Final Four as well. You're very close to that. That's not going to matter to the national media. So they will still hype up the SEC next year because they had 2 teams in the Final Four. And they don't have a team that's just rolling over everybody. As good as Auburn was this year, as good as Florida was this year, right there. You couldn't have one that just ran over everybody because you had these good teams in there. You had Alabama at the top as well. You had Tennessee and Kentucky. But the Big 12, the last 2 years, it's been Houston and it's been everybody else. They're not that far behind, but it is everybody else. So it's not fair, but maybe this Houston, the way that Houston has been running over everybody in the last 2 years is not a great sign for the Big 12 in terms of how the national media looks at it. Anyway, let me know what you guys think down in the comments below about this Houston run. Let me know what you think about Sawyer Robertson and what you're expecting from him in 2025, or how the Baylor men's basketball team is going to build this thing back up to the transfer portal. Let me know in the comments. Be sure to like and subscribe. That helps out a ton. Again, only about half of you that watch are actually subscribed. That helps me out, helps me keep my job, and helps bring you the best exclusive Baylor sports content in the game, bar none. So let me know what you guys think in the comments, or tweet at us at Locked On Baylor. Like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell. And we will see you tomorrow after I thank you for making it your first listen today and every day. And we will see you tomorrow on Locked On Baylor.